I sat in my car, parked right across from the home I practically paid for, watching as Christmas lights blinked merrily from every window. The sound of laughter faintly leaking into the cold December night. It was surreal, the house glowing. With holiday cheer was supposed to be my home too, not just structurally, but emotionally. And yet, here I was, invited by no one, banished by everyone. The ban wasn't loud or public. No big dramatic announcement, just a quiet, cowardly group text that read, "Hey, maybe skip Christmas dinner this year. It'll be too tense." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, making sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. My fingers froze mid-reply, realizing no one else in the family was going to speak up or question it. It wasn't just my sister-in-law's doing, it was quiet agreement from the people I once called my family. And so I sat in the car, engine off, radio low, watching from a distance as they all toasted cider and carved turkey inside a house I'd spent my entire adult life helping maintain. I was the one who came to the rescue when Dad couldn't refinance the second mortgage. I was the one who used my savings to cover the roof replacement and the furnace repair last winter. Yet now, they were pretending I didn't exist, laughing, clinking glasses under a roof I'd kept over their heads. My chest burned with quiet fury, the kind that bubbles just beneath the surface, dangerous in its calm. I had kept records. I had receipts. I never asked to be repaid, but I never forgot, either. And as I sat there watching my nephew open gifts near the fireplace I'd paid to restore, something inside me snapped into focus, not from rage, but from clarity. They forgot who I am. They forgot who funded their comfort. I wasn't going to fight to be let in. No, they made their choice. But they also forgot that the mortgage was in my name. And Christmas might be cheerful now, but January is about to be cold. Very cold. I watched as my brother raised a toast. I knew that laugh, smug and false, the same one he wore when he borrowed money and never looked back. Mom passed. Me by the window holding the china plates I gifted her 2 Christmases ago. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I had spent years bending backward to make sure this house stayed livable, that everyone stayed afloat. And the one time I disagreed when I said my sister-in-law's plan to drain Grandma's savings for a vacation was wrong. I was exiled. Just like that. They didn't want conflict at the table. Fine. But they were about to learn what true discomfort looked like. The wind howled past my car, rattling the windows as I finally started the engine. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving to make a move. One they would never see coming, because if they wanted me gone, I'd be gone. But so would the comfort they'd been living in. Thanks to my blind generosity, the drive back to my apartment was silent, but my mind was anything but. I wasn't angry in the traditional sense. I didn't want to yell or throw things or demand an apology. No, I felt something deeper, colder. Something that had been buried under years of ignored contributions, unpaid debts, and silent sacrifices. Every snowfall I shoveled off that driveway while Dad's back hurt. Every bill I quietly paid to keep the water running. Every time I stepped up while they stepped away. It all replayed in my mind like an old film, except now I saw the scenes for what they truly were. Not family love, but exploitation disguised as gratitude. They always knew I wouldn't say no. And this Christmas they decided they didn't even need to say thank you. That was their final mistake. When I got home, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight to the file cabinet, pulled out the thick folder marked house docs, and laid it on the kitchen counter. Inside were printouts of every wire transfer I'd made over the past 6 years, mortgage payments, repair invoices, even the closing documents that listed me as the primary title holder. My parents hadn't been able to secure the house after their bankruptcy, and I'd swooped in to save it, giving them a second chance at keeping their home. Only they seemed to have rewritten that chapter in their heads, making me the afterthought. In a story I authored, I pulled up the mortgage account online. My name, not Dad's, not Mom's, was the only one listed. I smirked. Not in pettiness, but in a kind of poetic justice. They had turned me into a stranger on Christmas, but they'd forgotten that the very house they were sitting in, full of warmth, lights, and gifts, wasn't legally theirs. It was mine. I didn't want to evict them. I didn't want drama. But I did want them to understand something very clearly. I was not disposable. I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer for the next morning, then drafted a notice that made it clear the living arrangement was being reviewed, effective immediately. It wasn't an eviction, not yet. Just a formal reminder that generosity is not ownership, and silence is not consent. My hands didn't shake as I typed. I felt a calm sense of control I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't begging for a seat at the table. I was reminding them who built the damn dining room. At noon the next day, I drove back to the house. I didn't park far away. I pulled straight into the driveway I'd repaved last spring and walked up to the front door. The same door I'd bought after the old one rotted off its hinges. I rang the bell once. No one answered. I rang again. Finally, my dad opened the door, confused. "What are you doing here?" he asked, clutching a cup of coffee like it was a shield. "Delivering a letter," I said flatly, handing him the envelope. He opened it slowly, his eyes darting across the page. His face shifted confusion to shock, then to disbelief. "You can't do this," he stammered. "Legally, I can," I replied. "And emotionally, well, that part was already done by you." I turned around and walked away, leaving them standing on a porch paid for by the person they from their lives. Let them enjoy their leftovers, because the bill for Christmas was coming due, and this time I wasn't paying in silence. The call from my mother came at 6:12 p.m. I saw her name flash on my phone screen, the same way it used to when she'd call asking for a small favor or just a bit of help covering an emergency bill. This time I let it ring out. I needed them to sit with that letter for a while to truly understand it. Every legal phrase, every timeline, every consequence. It wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. A decade of quiet compliance had taught them to believe I'd never push back. But people only remain silent until they realize silence is mistaken for consent. 10 minutes later, a text came through. "Can we please talk?" I didn't respond. Instead, I emailed my lawyer and confirmed we were moving forward with the occupancy review. If they wanted to keep calling it their house, they'd need to prove it with facts, not feelings. For years, I had been guilt-tripped into stepping up. When Dad's credit score plummeted, it was me who co-signed the new mortgage. When the basement flooded, it was me who paid for the contractors. When the roof caved in during that brutal winter, they couldn't afford insurance, so I wrote the check. And yet, every Christmas, every birthday, every family decision, I was treated like the outsider, the helper, the wallet with opinions no one asked for. Until I dared to question my brother's wife about funneling Grandma's money into a timeshare in Florida. That was the moment I was labeled toxic. That was the moment I became the problem. Not the one embezzling Grandma's funds. Not the one lying about expenses, but me. The one asking questions I didn't want to see them suffer. I wasn't cruel, but I did want them to understand the gravity of erasing someone who made your comfort possible. The next morning, the group chat finally lit up. My brother wrote, "So you're seriously trying to take the house?" I stared at the screen for a moment. I typed slowly, deliberately. "No, I'm just reclaiming what's mine. I never took anything from you. I just gave until I had nothing left but absence." The chat went silent. And then came the usual manipulations. My sister called me selfish. My mom asked me how I could destroy the family over a dinner, but they still didn't get it. This wasn't about one meal. This was about a legacy of quiet betrayal. About being useful but never valued. About being essential until you had an opinion. I muted the chat and stared out my window. The snow was falling steadily now, covering everything in a soft white blanket, beautiful but cold, just like the silence I'd embraced. I wasn't bitter. I was finally done being the cushion they landed on every time life hit hard. This time, they'd have to feel the floor. I wasn't going to save them from the impact anymore. That night, I pulled out my old journals, the ones where I kept notes of every loan, every payment, every conversation where they promised to pay me back. I never used them as weapons before. But now they were evidence, not to prove I was right, but to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the imbalance, that my boundaries now weren't cruelty. They were long overdue corrections. My lawyer's email came through at 8:03 p.m., confirming the paperwork had been delivered to the local court for formal filing. In a week, they'd receive notice to respond, and for once, they'd have to answer not just to me, but to the system that doesn't bend for emotional manipulation. The week that followed was eerily quiet. No phone calls, no dramatic visits, just silence, like the kind you hear before a storm. I knew my family. They weren't processing the consequences. They were strategizing, figuring out how to make me look like the villain, how to turn my years of sacrifice into ammunition against me, and honestly, I was ready for it. I'd spent too long allowing them to twist narratives while I stood politely on the sidelines, letting their version of reality take center stage. Not anymore. I checked the court tracking number for the filing confirmed. They'd received the notice. They had 10 business days to respond. Legally, they could challenge it, but the truth was they didn't have a case. Every repair, every payment, every legal title, it was in my name or under my funding. The emotional appeals wouldn't stand. Up in court and deep down, I think they knew that, which is probably why on the 6th day I got a voicemail from my dad. His voice was quiet, strained. "Hey, we got your letter. Your mother's upset. We didn't realize you felt this way. Can we sit down, talk it out?" I replayed that message 3 times. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he acknowledge what they'd done. It was all about how they felt, as if my choices were an emotional attack instead of a long overdue response. I didn't reply. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. The next day, a friend from the neighborhood messaged me, "Hey, your family's saying you're suing them for no reason? What's going on?" That was it. The story had started spinning. I'd seen this tactic before. Paint me as cold, dramatic, the overreactor. Never mind that I kept them afloat for over a decade. Never mind that I saved their home. That narrative didn't serve them now, so it had to be buried. I logged off social media entirely. Let them talk. Let them spin whatever fiction they needed to feel like victims. The truth didn't need their permission to exist. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the heating turned low, sipping tea, reflecting on the quiet war happening behind those holiday wreaths. Somewhere inside, a part of me still hoped for resolution. Not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. An honest conversation where they finally admitted how badly they'd treated me. But hope was a dangerous thing, and I'd spent too many years clutching it like a lifeline while it only ever pulled me under. I went to bed early that night, the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. No late-night texts, no emotional landmines, no begging for inclusion, just peace. In the morning, my lawyer forwarded me an email. A formal response had been submitted. My parents weren't contesting the ownership, but they were requesting mediation. My hands trembled slightly as I read the word. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first sign they were scared, because, for the first time, I wasn't begging to be let in. I was drawing a line they couldn't cross. Mediation, a word that once would have sounded like hope, now felt like a delay tactic. I stared at the formal request from their lawyer, every word carefully chosen to make it seem like they were seeking understanding when really they were buying time. I forwarded the document to my attorney, who called within minutes. "We can agree to mediation," she said, "but I want you to go in with clarity. They're trying to get you to compromise ownership. Don't let their warmth fool you." I thanked her and hung up. The date was set, 1 week from now. 1 week to prepare for a conversation I'd waited years for, but I didn't want an apology. I didn't need them to say they were wrong. I needed them to see, for once, that I wasn't the child they could control, manipulate, or erase. In the meantime, the holiday decorations stayed up at the house, the lights flickering like nothing had changed. Neighbors walked by, some glancing at me when I drove past. I didn't care about gossip. Let them whisper. Let them wonder why the quiet one had finally raised their voice. In truth, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I spent the week pulling every receipt, transfer, and legal document I had. When I walked into that mediation, I didn't want emotion to cloud the room. I wanted proof, undeniable, unshakable, factual. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed in quiet power, simple blazer, clean lines, no makeup, no performance. I walked into the law office with my head high. My parents were already inside, seated next to their attorney. My brother sat behind them, arms crossed. My sister-in-law was conveniently out of town. I took my seat. The mediator introduced herself and asked us all to speak with civility and respect. I almost laughed. Civility was what got me here, silencing myself so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The mediator asked my parents to begin. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't realize you felt so, isolated. You never said anything." I bit my tongue. Of course I had dozens of times. "We thought you were helping because you wanted to." "Families help each other, do they?" I replied softly. "Or do they only call it family when it benefits them?" My mother started to tear up, dabbing her eyes like a show for the room. I didn't react. I wasn't there to comfort anymore. I was there to correct a pattern. When it was my turn, I opened the folder and laid out every document. Proof of ownership, proof of payment, all in black and white. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, "but I'm not going to disappear for your comfort anymore. You made a choice to exile me? Now I'm choosing to stop financing my own erasure." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. And for the first time in my life, they listened in stunned silence. The mediator paused the session after my presentation, asking for a 10-minute recess. I walked out into the hall, not looking back at their faces. My lawyer joined me. "You did excellent," she said. "They didn't expect you to be this prepared." I nodded, staring out the window. Snowflakes were falling slowly, blanketing the street like they had that night. I sat outside the house, but this time I wasn't watching through a windshield. I was standing tall. When we returned, my parents were quieter. My brother leaned forward, his tone more restrained. "We didn't mean for it to get this far. We just, thought maybe you'd cool down." I blinked slowly. "You banned me from my own house and expected me to cool down?" His mouth opened, then shut. No reply. The mediator turned to my parents. Are you contesting ownership? They looked at each other. My mother spoke. No, we're not. We just don't want the family to fall apart. I smiled, not in cruelty, but in finality. It already did. You just didn't notice until the money stopped flowing. The agreement was simple. They could stay until March, enough time to find alternate housing. I wouldn't charge them rent, but after that, the house would be sold and I'd take back control of the property, of the past, and of myself. They agreed hesitantly, reluctantly, but legally. I left the meeting without looking back. I didn't need their hugs, their tears, or their rehearsed regrets. I needed to breathe, and I did for the first time in years. On the drive home, I passed the house one last time. The lights were still on. The snow piling on the roof I'd paid to fix, but this time I felt nothing. No ache, no anger, just closure. Let them decorate it, mourn it, sit in it. In a few months it would belong to someone else, and I would finally belong to myself. Christmas would come and go, but this year I'd given myself the only gift that mattered: freedom. The first day of January felt different than it ever had before, not because of fireworks or champagne or false promises of new beginnings, but because for once the start of the year didn't carry the weight of unresolved pain. I woke up in my own apartment, sunlight streaming in through clean windows, and realized that for the first time in over a decade, I didn't have to brace myself for a message, a guilt trip, or a sudden family emergency that only I could fix. My phone was quiet, no Happy New Year from my parents, no half-hearted text from my brother, just silence, and it was glorious. I made myself coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened a blank notebook. Not for journaling or venting, but for building. I wanted to write a new plan, not for them, for me. I made a list of all the things I'd postponed over the years: travel, savings, my dream to launch my own design studio. I'd put it all on hold every time someone in my family needed rescuing. But that era was over. They had made it abundantly clear with their actions and their omissions that I was only family when convenient. So I stopped being available. When March came, I didn't send reminders. I let the legal notices arrive the way they were, supposed to official, unemotional binding. My parents didn't respond at first, but I knew they would. They always did when deadlines became real. I was already working with a realtor, prepping the house for listing, not to spite them, but because it was time to close a chapter that had long since lost its warmth. When the realtor saw the house, she raised an eyebrow. They still live here. I nodded for now, but not for long. She laughed gently. You've taken care of it, haven't you? I smiled, because even a stranger could see what my family refused to admit. I had carried the house, and by extension them, alone. And I wasn't ashamed of that, but I also wasn't going to carry it anymore. My lawyer sent the final notice mid-February. The move-out deadline was set, and surprisingly, this time, there was no dramatic resistance, no threats, no pleas. Maybe they knew it was futile. Maybe they were tired too. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know, because peace, I was learning, isn't about everyone getting along. It's about removing yourself from where you are not respected. March 15th came and the house was empty. No note, no goodbye. Just a hollow, echoing silence when I stepped inside to do the final walkthrough. The emptiness of the house was oddly satisfying. It was stripped of holiday decorations, stripped of tension, stripped of illusions. I walked from room to room, remembering moments, some fond, some fraught. The mismatched paint in the living room, I had touched up myself at 3 a.m. before a family party because no one else bothered. The kitchen island, the one I had helped install when the old one collapsed, all while Dad claimed he'd get to it eventually. I touched the walls gently, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the lessons this house had taught me to give. The realtor listed the property within the week, and interest was immediate. A young couple placed an offer almost instantly, and I accepted without hesitation. The sale finalized quickly, and the funds transferred cleanly into my account. I didn't celebrate with champagne or a dinner out. I just sat in my car outside the empty house one last time, took a photo, and whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you and goodbye." My parents never reached out again. My brother sent a single email asking if I could spare a bit for a business investment. I didn't reply. My silence was my final statement. Not a punishment, a boundary. In April, I finally booked a solo trip to Lisbon, a city I had dreamed of visiting for years. Every previous attempt was canceled by some family crisis. This time, no one could stop me. On the plane, watching the clouds drift below, I thought about everything that had led me here. The years of giving, the moments of being invisible, the quiet resilience that had built inside me like steel. I wasn't heartened by what happened. I was clarified. My role in their lives had always been transactional, disguised as tradition. Now, I was free to build something real: friendships, dreams, a life unanchored by guilt. As the plane descended, I smiled for the first time in months without heaviness. They banned me from Christmas, but they had freed me from a lifetime of obligation. And in that strange, unexpected way, I was finally home. I woke up the next morning to find that the online banking app notifications had started pouring in. That trust, in turn, was now beginning to issue notices to the house occupants, my parents and my sister, that their tenancy was being reviewed. No, I wasn't evicting them. That would have been too harsh. The very people who had pushed me out of family dinners and replaced tradition with cruelty were now forced to recognize my value in a language they had chosen to speak power and paper. While my parents were trying to call me, send voice notes, and text desperately about a misunderstanding, I remained silent. My silence was my strength now. I was attending a charity gala that same evening with my company's board, sipping wine and making speeches about compassion, inclusion, and recognizing unseen efforts in families and corporations alike. I wasn't being hypocritical. The night ended with a standing ovation, not for my business acumen, but for my personal story, which I had shared for the first time. I left the stage in tears, relief that I had found my identity beyond family expectations, gender roles, and toxic traditions. That night, as I looked at the skyline from my penthouse balcony, I realized the person they had tried to exile was now the one they could no longer ignore. I was no longer seeking their love. I was living with self-respect. By Monday morning, the narrative in the extended family had flipped entirely. My cousins, who had remained silent before, were now texting me apologies. My aunt, who used to side with my parents on everything, sent a long email titled, "I had no idea." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes dignity is maintained, not by defending yourself, but by simply standing tall. I'd also received a surprising call that afternoon from the family's church committee. They asked if I'd be willing to speak about reconciliation and personal healing at an upcoming event. It was ironic, really. The girl who had been banned from Christmas dinner was now being asked to deliver a keynote on healing. I expected to prove anything, but because I genuinely had something to say. That evening, as I rehearsed my speech, I received a courier. It was from my sister. A handwritten note said, "Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I didn't want you to shine because I felt small in your shadow. I'm sorry." For a brief moment, the tears welled up again. But then I looked at the second page. It was a formal letter requesting to resume the mortgage support she'd denied earlier. That letter was her real message, and my answer came in the form of silence once more. Some apologies come laced with self-interest, and I had finally learned the art of separating sentiment from manipulation. This time, I wasn't just walking away, was closing the door gently but firmly. Weeks passed. I spent more time cultivating new traditions. I started hosting dinners with close friends, those who had stayed by my side when even blood ties had failed me. We'd gather on Saturdays and share stories, laugh uncontrollably, and pour wine like it was a ritual of release. These were my new people, my chosen family. During one of those dinners, someone asked me, "Do you miss them?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Love had always been conditional in my household. My value measured by obedience, by silence, by servitude. I was expected to carry burdens without acknowledgement and sacrifice dreams to fuel others, but not anymore. I'd now become a woman who didn't just survive a betrayal, but rewrote the rules of her legacy. That winter, while the rest of the family celebrated Christmas in the house I'd once furnished and supported, I was in Iceland with friends, watching the northern lights. The sky danced above us like it was painting its own story of rebirth. And I let go of the last piece of resentment I'd held. Because the truth is, forgiveness doesn't mean reopening old doors, it means removing the weight from your own soul. I had forgiven them, but I had also released them from the power to define me. Months later, something unexpected happened. My father fell ill. I was informed through a family friend who still kept in touch. The old me would have rushed to the hospital begging to help. But this time I paused, not because I lacked empathy, but because I had boundaries now. I sent flowers, a get well card, and a note saying, "Wishing you strength. Take care, nothing more." My presence wasn't a given anymore, had to be earned. As his recovery progressed, I received another letter, this time from my mother. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. She wrote, "I didn't know how to love you the right way. You were strong, and I feared that your success made me feel like I failed. I hope someday you'll visit again, not for duty, but for dinner." There were no demands, no expectations, just words that sounded like genuine reflection. I didn't promise anything, but I smiled. Because sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to live well, without bitterness, while still holding space for possible reconciliation. I never did go back to that Christmas dinner, but a year later I hosted my own holiday gathering. The table was full, the laughter was real, and as I raised my glass, I toasted to everyone who had ever felt rejected by those meant to protect them. To those who were cast out, only to find their worth outside the walls that tried to confine them. And I whispered to myself, they banned me from the table, but I built a banquet they could never reach.